American States, co-founder and general counsel to the Newer Rights Foundation. He's also the U.S. chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, and where he is previously a senior fellow, and he has done a yeoman's work on this case. We'll then hear from Sadiq Midi, who's on his way. He should be here very shortly, an expert in public diplomacy and international security, with over a decade of experience in American foreign security policy, focusing on the geopolitical dynamics of Afghanistan and South Asia. Mr. Amini has played a pivotal role in policy analysis, outreach, and crisis response, including advising on the U.S.-Afghanistan bilateral security agreement and coordinating vital evacuation efforts during the Taliban takeover, earning him the U.S. Department of State's Heroism Award. Then we'll hear from Ben Linden, who is the Advocacy Director for Europe and Central Asia for Amnesty International USA, where he works to advance human rights in U.S. foreign policy. Prior to joining Amnesty, Ben served as the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Commerce Department, and the Office of Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, who we all know very well, because I serve as co-chair and Jim has served as co-chair of the China Commission, and he's served very great in that capacity. He has also worked, you being Ben, as the Asia Society in New York and taught English in South Korea. So, Mr. Bukhari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair Smith, Co-Chair McGovern, honorable members of Congress and the Commission. I would like to just before add that I have a longer statement for the record, which I would like to be included.
Without objection, so ordered, and that goes for all of your statements and anything else you would like to attach to them.
Thank you. I've traveled 15 hours to get here, so I apologize in advance to the Commission if I go a tad bit over my time. I could stand here today and talk about all the injustices unfolding in Pakistan, but today I want to give you the context, the story behind the headlines, so you can truly get a grasp of what is happening and why. Let me start with the event that shattered whatever remained of a Pakistan democratic facade, the general elections of February 8th, 2024. These were the most brutally rigged elections in Pakistan's history. The rigging started months earlier than the actual election day. They stole the symbol of our very part of the party, which was the cricket bat, so voters couldn't identify us on the ballot. Our candidates were forced to contest as independents, creating chaos and confusion. Nomination papers were rejected, rallies were banned, banners were torn down, flags were forbidden, leaders were jailed, exiled, driven underground. Many of them are here today. Yet the people of Pakistan rose to the challenge. And one of the highest turnouts in our history, the Pakistanis came out and voted for change. Independent data and independent observers have both shown with academic fact that PTI-affiliated candidates have won over 170 to 180 seats in the existing parliament. Unfortunately, overnight, from 24 to 72 hours, those results were all changed. As a result, Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Insaf couldn't form a government. Brutality continued. There were too many votes for even the constituency that even held the amount of constituents. So if a constituency had 400 votes, somehow the person who got the vote changed in Form 47 had 450,000 votes. So overnight, populations grew by 50 to 100,000. Let me be very clear that Pakistan's 2024 elections were neither free nor fair. They were engineered to silence the democratic voices of millions. As if crushing democracy at the ballot box wasn't enough, Pakistan's rulers then turned their knives to the judiciary. Through the 26th constitutional amendment, they rewrote the rules of justice. They stacked the Judicial Commission with politicians, loyalists, stripping judges of independence. Our courts, once a check for executive power, became a tool of the power. Previously, judicial appointments were driven largely by senior judges, themselves ensuring a measure of autonomy and judicial independence. It subordinates the independence of judiciary to political interest, erodes public confidence, no longer impartial, and became an extension of the executive. It violates the Pakistan Constitution itself, from Article 175, which enshrines the separation of power, to Article 10, which guarantees every individual the right to a fair trial before an impartial, competent court. The UN Special Rapporteur on Independence and Judges and Lawyers has said, quote, real risk to judicial independence and individual rights to a fair hearing by a competent, independent, and impartial tribunal. The ICJ has described it as, quote, a serious threat to independence of judiciary. In 2023, a Supreme Court bench declared that civilians could not be tried in military courts. However, the 26th Amendment, a larger handpicked bench, reversed that ruling. This is not justice. This is a colonial tool of intimidation, resurrected to silence dissent. Pakistan now virtually stands alone in the world by allowing military trials of civilians under a constitution that supposedly guarantees its fair trial and due protest. The ICJ says it's a travesty of justice, glaring surrender of human rights. I want to add that these military courts, after May 9th, 2023, convicted 104 civilians, mostly PTI supporters, voters, or activists, were sentenced to a prison term of up to 10 years. Every single one of them was convicted, so 100% conviction rate. These trials were held in secret, in dark rooms where family and public were barred from attending. No charge sheets or judgments have been published till date. Trials happen, documents are hidden from lawyers and the legal team, so not a single document can leave that courtroom till date. Judges are army officers, and appeals are given not to civilian court judges, but rather to the army chief himself, who will then hand it down to his subordinates to make a tribunal, to come out with whatever decision they want with no justification or evidence. Even the sentences are arbitrary. Some were jailed for a year, others were jailed for a decade. No clear reason except political punishment. An example is Barrister Hassan Khan Niazi, Imran Khan's nephew, who was sentenced to 10 years despite minor allegations. This is a purge, it's not justice. It violates Pakistan's own constitution, as I mentioned earlier. It violates international law. Article 14 of the ICCPR demands fair public trials in independent courts. From the US State Department to the EU, to the UK, Human Rights Watch, and the ICJ, the world is united in condemning Pakistan's military trials on civilians. Pakistan's Supreme Court, once a beacon of hope, has wavered under pressure, green-lighting this sham proceedings. And what about the voices that are trying to tell these stories? Freedom of speech in Pakistan is dying. Journalists have been arrested, abducted, tortured, or driven in exile. Dr. Moin Pirzada, one sitting right here. Independent shutdowns and social media blackouts are now a standard tactics to bury dissent. YouTube channels criticizing the government or the establishment vanished overnight. TV anchors are blacklisted if they dare to speak even Imran Khan's name, which is forbidden on national television. I appear on international media myself, but I'm not allowed to appear on local media. The consequences of this are deadly. From senior anchors like Arshad Sharif, one of Pakistan's most respected journalists who fled the country under threats for his life and continued reporting from abroad, was assassinated in Kenya. There are many cases of exile of our journalists that are abroad. Either they have to take a sabbatical if they don't toe the line, or they have to take exile. Most recently, a magistrate ordered nearly 30 YouTube channels to shut down simply because they expose the truth. Google wants them to take a legal stay in the High Court, which is not possible for those who are in exile. If they go to Pakistan, we know what torture is coming next. I want to, as this repression continues, the rigging of elections, the capturing the courts, military trials, the silencing of media, it all leads back to one man and one thing: the elephant in the room, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan. Since 2022, he has faced relentless prosecution. Over 200 legal cases he's been charged with. From cases like the Iddat case, which is a ridiculous illegal marriage case, to murder charges, to one that him and his wife, Bushra Imran Khan, have been charged for, the Al-Qadir case. The Al-Qadir case was 190 million pounds, which was a personal settlement between a property developer and the NCA, National Crime Agency of the UK, which then got deposited into the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Nothing to do with our government, nothing to do with Imran Khan. The money was deposited directly there, earning interest. That same property developer developed a university in a trust, which Imran Khan and his wife were trustees of. All have agreed that there's been no financial benefit. In fact, 200 plus students have studied for free. This is the first time in a country where a husband and wife have been imprisoned for giving university level education for free to 200 odd children. Abduction, breaking into homes, trashing of their personal property, abduction of children, torture, using women as a tool to get the politicians and the men out to surrender themselves is the first time we've seen this in Pakistani history. On November 26, more known as the Islamabad massacre, Pakistani people took to the streets to protest peacefully. In exchange, they were met with an iron fist. 12 people were killed. Even a dear colleague of mine, Muhammad Idris, who was my worker and friend, was shot in the stomach and died. The government claimed no casualties and claimed that they didn't use any ammunition. Thanks to international media, BBC, Reuters, and The Independent, they unearthed 12 deaths from that protest itself. As others I know will speak about, and the co-chairs have said, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has declared Imran Khan's imprisonment as illegal and demands an immediate release. Imran Khan remains the most popular figure in Pakistani history and remains the most popular leader of a political party till date. I want to just briefly, just before I conclude, add that Imran Khan and his wife are in solitary confinement for over 23 hours a day. They are in inhumane conditions. Bugs and insects are deliberately released into their cell, which is not even a cell of what one should get when he's a former prime minister legally. Their prisoner rights are abused. They aren't given fresh water, substandard food in 50 degrees temperature. They say that they have some form of cooling, but what they do is they cut off the electricity. Intimidation in front of his wife is done by a supervisor beating up a subordinate in front of her to intimidate her. This is all being done so Imran Khan can see his wife in mental torture and then try to break his will. This is unfortunately not going to happen. Imran Khan, his colleagues that are in prison, from our two-time former Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi to our 70-year-old Health Minister Yasmin Rashid, are all facing arbitrary detention for years now. I call upon all the esteemed members here today. The choice is clear. We either let it slide into further dictatorship under the cover of law, or we stand with the people who yearn for democracy, dignity, and justice. Lastly, I just say the people of Pakistan deserve to choose their leaders fairly, to speak without fear, to live under laws that protect them, not persecute them. I thank you for your time. I urge you to stand with 250 million people of Pakistan and look away from the hand-picked few. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bukhari, thank you for that extraordinarily powerful statement, for your courage. And it's hopefully not only will Congress, but the executive branch will sit up and take note right now. So thank you so very much for that. Mr. Genser.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Smith, Commissioner McGovern, Congressman Subramanian. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify on the human rights crisis unfolding in Pakistan. I speak today as international counsel to former Prime Minister Imran Khan, whose case exemplifies the alarming erosion of democratic institutions, rule of law, and civil liberties under Pakistan's current regime. My testimony will first talk about the broader situation marked by repression, censorship, and arbitrary detentions. I'll speak briefly about the plight of Mr. Khan, specifically, before concluding with recommendations for Congress, the Trump administration, and broader international community. And I'll also seek to not repeat the really important points that were made by my colleague Zulfi Bukhari as well. Since Imran Khan was removed from power in April of 2022, Pakistan's human rights landscape has deteriorated markedly as the military-backed authorities use a range of repressive measures to consolidate power and suppress dissent. There were more than 4,000 arrests made following protests that were sparked by Khan's detention. As Mr. Bukhari noted, 104 civilians were convicted by military courts, 85 of them still behind bars, and these prisoners were all given from 2 to 10 years in prison. Estimates vary overall, but there are likely more than about 1,100 political prisoners behind bars in Pakistan, while about 8,000 others remain under indictment but are out on bail, awaiting trials to be held. Equally troubling, Pakistan's information landscape has been engineered to elect and keep in power the current regime, and its prime minister, led by its prime minister Shehbaz Sharif. The general election was supposed to happen in August of 2023, but was held illegally late under the Constitution. I won't speak more about that because Mr. Bukhari covered it. But the US, EU, and UK expressed serious concerns about election irregularities and called for an investigation. In addition, press freedom has been totally and completely eviscerated. The Committee to Protect Journalists have condemned blocks on critical websites and the throttling of access to the internet. Broadcasters have been banned from mentioning Khan or the PTI. In beginning April 2022, the media regulator PEMRA issued various directives outlawing Imran Khan from appearing on the air and even past speeches, culminating in an order that branded his speeches all as, quote, hate speech. Over the last week, as was mentioned already, Google was ordered to remove and did in fact remove the YouTube channels of 27 government critics, including journalists and Imran Khan and PTI supporters, at the demand of the National Cybercrime Investigation Agency for, quote, sharing highly intimidating, provocative, and derogatory contents against state institutions. In essence, they just admitted publicly that it is because of their speech. Now the Pakistani regime is going further, and they're demanding that if Google wants to remain in business in Pakistan, that they need to block access to these websites, not just in Pakistan, where they're violating international law by banning what is obviously protected speech, but they want those sites to be banned locally. So, for example, the journalist here in the room today from Pakistan who was forced to flee the country because of persecution, the regime is now trying to stop him from broadcasting from the United States or people around the world hearing what he has to say. I think it's going to be very important for Congress in light of the fact that Google is an American company to send a very clear message to Google that this should not be tolerated and they should not bend or break to the pressure from the Pakistani regime. In this context, the case of former Prime Minister Imran Khan demonstrates the collapse of democratic norms in Pakistan. As noted, he's faced more than 200 cases. He remains behind bars today, held in solitary confinement, and already facing a prison term of over 27 years on an array of politically motivated convictions. His wife, Bushra Bibi, is already serving a 7-year sentence on similarly politicized charges. And there are literally hundreds of more cases that the regime is bringing against Khan, all totally bogus. As was noted earlier, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, in response to a petition we submitted there on his behalf, concluded there was, quote, no legal basis, and appears that the charges appears to have been intended to disqualify him from running for political office. In short, his detention is declared was illegal in violation of international law, and it called for his immediate release. We've had strong support on Capitol Hill, and we're very grateful for it, for freedom, democracy, and human rights in Pakistan. As was noted earlier by Co-Chair Smith, Congressman Wilson, and Congressman Panetta introduced the bipartisan Pakistan Democracy Act, authorizing targeted sanctions on officials implicated in gross human rights abuses. Another bipartisan group of 59 members wrote to President Trump in May of this year that the 2024 elections in February were riddled with vote rigging and repression, and highlighted the ongoing imprisonment of Imran Khan, and urged the administration to condition ties on concrete steps towards free and fair elections and the release of all political prisoners. Obviously, Mr. Khan's persecution is inextricably linked to the broader repression facing the people of Pakistan. If a former prime minister can be treated in this manner, as Co-Chair McGovern pointed out, ordinary citizens and activists have little hope. In closing, Pakistan is a nation of 240 million people. Its success matters enormously, not only for all of them, but to ensure that core democratic principles are respected and regional stability is preserved. Today, however, the country has trampled on the rule of law, silenced the press, imprisoned its political opponents to secure an iron grip on power. While Imran Khan's case is the highest profile example, there are tens of thousands of other cases that are just as important and just as egregious in terms of the rights abuses. The U.S. and the international community must not look away. There's much that can be done to help, and holding this hearing itself is a critical step forward. First, I recommend that Congress remain engaged and reach out to Pakistan's Prime Minister to demand the immediate release of all political prisoners and the freedom of the press, the rule of law, and democracy be restored to Pakistan. In addition, the Congress should urge President Trump and Secretary Rubio to make these top goals of the Trump administration. I also believe, and I speak about this personally, that the Congressman Wilson bill should also be advanced through the Congress as rapidly as possible. And of course, rules should be told in no uncertain terms that if it blocks access to YouTube channels globally that are related to people that are simply standing up for democracy and human rights in Pakistan, that will be seen as a serious concern for the United States government and for the U.S. Congress. Second, I'd ask President Trump and Secretary Rubio both personally to take up the situation in Pakistan. While undoubtedly situations in places like Ukraine, Gaza, and Iran, among others, are taking up enormous diplomatic bandwidth, the future of Pakistan is incredibly important to the United States, which needs a stable partner with whom to cooperate on a wide array of issues. The relentless crackdown on democracy, freedom, and the rule of law in Pakistan causes enormous instability within the country and makes it much more difficult for the U.S. to see Pakistan as a reliable partner. Third and finally, I would call on the UN and the wider international community to hold the Pakistani regime accountable for all of its rights abuses, to put enormous pressure on the regime to reach a negotiated settlement with the opposition that would begin with the release of all political prisoners and create an irreversible roadmap for the restoration of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Pakistan. Tragically, the suffering of others has overshadowed the severe repression of the Pakistani people by the current regime. That said, however, the fate of Pakistan will have an enormous impact not only on its own people, but on the region and the world. We cannot continue to ignore the severity and scale of rights abuses being committed against the people of Pakistan. The time for action is now. Thank you.
Mr. Amini, thank you very much, Jared.
Good afternoon, Congressman Smith, Congressman McGovern, and all of the distinguished members of the Human Rights Commission, all of the participants in this room. Thank you for inviting me today to speak on the topic of Pakistan and its ongoing repression and human rights abuses. It's very important for the US Congress to understand the nature of the Pakistani state in order to be able to adopt clear policy in order to deal with it accordingly. Pakistan is no doubt an authoritarian military dictatorship regime. The military controls every aspect of the Pakistani state, from political appointments to economic policies to diplomacy to resources, leaving no room for genuine civilian governance. That's not to say that the civilians are innocent, and I will get into that in a later part. The recent general election of 2024 serves as a testament to this truth, as it was only a show designed to install a government favored by military. The evidence for electoral manipulation is undeniable. We witnessed internet blackout, media censorship, opposition groups were suppressed, candidates favored by the people were disqualified to clear the path for military's favorite choices. These actions confirmed that the election was a sham, and in fact, there is no democracy there. Another critical issue is, for decades, Pakistan's ethnic minorities have been treated as second-class citizens. Their rich cultures, languages, and identities are suppressed, and their grievances are met with a state-sponsored repression. The arrest and continued detention of Dr. Mehrang Baluch, a prominent Baluch female leader, is just one example. Dr. Baluch committed no crime. Her only offense is fulfilling her civic duty, protesting against violence and discrimination her people endures, and courageously seeking justice for the countless disappeared and murdered Baluch citizens. Her detention, carried out in blatant disregard of all international norms, highlights the military dictator's fear of a strong, capable women leaders, especially those emerging from ethnic minority communities. Religious minorities in Pakistan. Pakistan's religious minorities live in constant state of fear. Non-Muslims, including Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, along with Shiites, Sufis, and other sects of Islam, have never been truly safe. They face discrimination and violence. The legal system often becomes a tool of their oppression, failing to provide the protection and justice they deserve. Blasphemy laws are weaponized against them, mob violence is frequently condoned, and their places of worship are routinely attacked. The plight of women in Pakistan. Pakistani women face restrictions and discrimination across all aspects of life. While the regime may parade women in political roles, their presence is largely symbolic. These women mostly come from rich and powerful families with ties to the military and doesn't represent the grassroots. Even these women rarely exercise any real power. If male political leaders are mere puppets of the military, one can only imagine the utter lack of agency afforded to the women. Beyond the political sphere, women in Pakistan confront violence, including honor killings, domestic abuse, sexual assault, Forced marriages remain a tragedy for many, and the cases of rapes often go unaddressed, with victims facing a justice system that frequently fails them. Furthermore, women disproportionately suffer from unemployment and lack of economic opportunity, perpetuating a cycle of dependency. The regime's failure to genuinely address these issues speaks volume about its disregard for half of its population. But the most critical issue of all, Pakistan's duplicity and double game when it comes to its relationship with the United States. Pakistan has consistently played a double game with the United States, portraying itself as an ally while undermining American interests. They sided with dictators in Russia, China, and Iran as they created, armed, trained, and managed Taliban terrorists. Their objective was clear: to kill Americans and NATO forces in Afghanistan and force them out of the region that they got. They used the charismatic figure of Imran Khan, then Prime Minister, to mislead President Trump after announcement of his South Asia strategy. Khan rushed to Washington presenting a message of peace from the Taliban, a message that was in fact a carefully crafted deception by his Russian counterparts. He convinced President Trump to pursue a peace deal with the Taliban, which only empowered these terrorists, as they were never sincere. The peace process inevitably failed, leading to the US withdrawal and the subsequent establishment of a gender apartheid regime in Afghanistan by the Taliban terrorists, whose Russian recognition just a few days ago proves that the Taliban's status as a Russian proxy. And the civilians played a key role in this. As I mentioned, Prime Minister Imran Khan at the time acted as a spokesperson for the Taliban, as he was going around the world indicating that this group is an indigenous group serving the interests of the people of Afghanistan or serving Islamic identity. That was not the case. And it was later proved, however, the dangers, the terrorism nature, as well as the hatred that they have towards the West, towards women, and all of the ideals that we have. And civilians played a role in that. So the Pakistani state cannot buy the trust of the United States by imprisoning only few individuals like Imran Khan or the head of the ISI, Faiz Hamid. They need to go after the broader network of all of the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian networks within their establishment, whether it's political and military. Now, the Pakistani leaders, both military and civilians, complain about the Taliban threats as they seek US assistance to combat them. But even now, according to them, the Taliban is good for Afghanistan but bad for Pakistan. This is a blatant display of their duplicity. Pakistan's ongoing arrest, detention, and forceful deportation of Afghan refugees is shameful and inhumane. These Afghans had escaped the very Taliban tyranny that Pakistani leaders helped bring to power, and now the Pakistani regime is forcibly sending them back. What kind of human beings force refugees to return to a terrorist regime that denies girls access to education, systematically subjugates an entire nation into darkness, and commits unspeakable atrocities? If it wasn't enough to force Afghanistan into this darkness, now those seeking refuge are being sent back. This is inhuman, utterly unjustifiable, and demands the strongest possible condemnation from all civilized nations of the world. A call to action. The United States must hold the Pakistani leaders, both civilians and military leaders, accountable and demand a clear declaration of where they truly stand moving forward. The choice before Pakistani leadership is simple: a stand with democracies or a stand with authoritarians and a state sponsor of terror. That is Russia, China, Iran, the axis of evil, and the Russian terrorist puppet regime of the Taliban in Afghanistan. If Pakistan cannot entangle itself from the axis of evil, then the United States must treat it as such, a state sponsor of terror. The metrics for their alignment with democracies are clear and verifiable. Cut off all ties with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Stop mistreating and forcing Afghans to return, and instead provide legal protection, pathways for them to remain safely in Pakistan until Afghanistan is truly free. Support the anti-Taliban Afghans so they can free their country from the Russian occupation and its terrorist puppet regime of Taliban. A free Afghanistan will naturally lead to the voluntary return of most Afghan refugees. Purge army and political structure from all of the Russian and Chinese agents who are closely working with the terrorists and undermining democratic principles. Open up the political space for all ethnic and religious minorities. Hold a genuinely free and fair election that will naturally cement their ties with the United States and democracies of the world. The time for Pakistan's duplicity is over. Both civilians and military leaders, the United States must demand a clear choice and hold them accountable for the path that they choose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amini. Appreciate your testimony and your leadership. I'd like to now recognize Ben Linden for such time as he would like to use.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Chairman McGovern, Representatives Bonamiki and Subramanian, and all commission staff. Thank you for this important hearing. Today, I will discuss legal and physical attacks against religious and ethnic minorities in Pakistan. These human rights violations contribute to the erosion of rule of law for all Pakistanis, creating an environment hostile to all dissent. The crackdown on freedom of association and expression experienced by the PTI, as described by my colleagues on this panel, should be understood in the context of this larger assault on human rights. First, I'll speak about the attacks on the Baluch activists. The Baluch Yakjati Committee, the BYC, has mobilized thousands to peacefully demand justice, accountability, and an end to enforced disappearances. Yet BYC members who attempt to peacefully protest are arrested, while internet and mobile services are routinely suspended and media coverage of the protests is severely restricted. Dr. Marang Baluch, chief organizer of the BYC, has been under arbitrary detention alongside 5 other activists since March 22nd. Meanwhile, the Baluchistan Assembly recently amended its provisional anti-terrorism law to allow for detention up to 90 days without charges. The activists could have their sentences extended further under this law. Last week, the BYC announced that its detained activists had been relocated and that their families were being denied access. Dr. Marang and the other activists have not been given due process and should be freed. The past 6 months has also seen a marked increase in enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings targeting Baluch activists. Just 2 weeks ago, BYC member Zishan Zahir was abducted. 8 hours later, his bullet-ridden body was dumped. These cases are part of a systemic attack on the rights of the Baluch community. Turning now to religious minorities. For decades, Pakistan's penal code has barred members of the Ahmadi community from calling themselves Muslims or practicing their faith in public. Harassment and restrictions against Ahmadis spiked around Eid holiday last month, when individuals were forced to sign affidavits to refrain from Eid prayers and rituals. 3 Ahmadis have been killed since mid-April in apparent targeted attacks. Instead of protecting this community, local authorities have arrested Ahmadis, including children, outside of their places of worship around Friday prayers. Even the Lahore High Court Bar Association has lobbied for restrictions on this community. These institutions should be protecting the rights of religious minorities, not attacking those rights. Meanwhile, Pakistan's vaguely worded blasphemy laws are increasingly being weaponized by majoritarian religious groups, while the accused have few means to defend themselves. In 2024 alone, 344 new cases were opened following blasphemy allegations. This caused widespread harassment and intimidation against religious minorities, although most cases were against the recognized Muslim community itself. 10 of those accused of blasphemy last year were extrajudicially killed. Finally, turning to the forced deportations of Afghan nationals. In September of 2023, the Pakistani government announced a phased deportation plan targeting Afghan refugees and asylum seekers. Since then, more than 1 million Afghan nationals have been forcibly returned to Afghanistan. People facing forced return to Afghanistan, including journalists, human rights defenders, women protesters, artists, and former government officials, are at imminent risk of persecution and repression by the Taliban. And I would add that Afghan women refugees' voices would be particularly valuable to this commission, and perhaps they could be invited back for another hearing to update this commission in the near future. Those Afghan refugees still in Pakistan, live in constant fear of harassment, arbitrary detention, and deportation, with no due process or lawyers to represent them. Among them are those in the pipeline for U.S. P1, P2, and special immigrant visas, or CIVs, some of whom fought alongside U.S. forces for 20 years. The harms against Afghans in Pakistan are compounding. Deportation orders and their looming deadlines have made Afghan refugees vulnerable to extortion by officials who demand bribes, and parents are afraid to send their children to school in case they're picked up for deportation. Some of those receiving support from NGOs have had their aid cut due to the freeze in U.S. foreign aid, making them even more vulnerable. Due to the ongoing conditions in Afghanistan and the risks facing those who are returned, any deportation or forced return of Afghans to Afghanistan violates the principle of non-refoulement. US Congress and the Trump administration should do the following. First, call for an end to the harassment, arbitrary detention, and extrajudicial killings of Baluch human rights defenders exercising their rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Second, call on the Pakistani authorities to release and drop charges against all Ahmadis detained solely for exercising their human rights, in particular, their rights to worship freely, and take concrete steps to protect those rights. Third, call on the Pakistani government to repeal all blasphemy laws and laws that discriminate against the Ahmadi community. Fourth, reverse the ban on Afghan nationals entering the United States and allow the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and the State Department's Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, or CARE office, to continue to process P1 and P2 visas and CIVs, fulfilling a bipartisan commitment from Congress to support Afghan allies. Needless to say, the dismantlement of the CARE office should be reversed. Finally, or penultimately, extend temporary protected status for Afghans already in the United States, and finally call on the Pakistani government to stop the arbitrary arrests, detentions, and harassment of Afghan nationals and reverse the decision to forcefully deport Afghan nationals. Before wrapping, I want to just add one note, which is to say, to briefly acknowledge that the work of defending human rights in Pakistan and everywhere requires expertise at all levels of government. Amnesty International is gravely concerned by the reckless reorganization of the State Department, the drastic cuts to the human rights and humanitarian assistance, and as of last week, the reduction in force affecting critical human rights positions held by civil servants in the State Department. Congress should act expeditiously, using all oversight, appropriations, and other powers to prevent permanent damage to the State Department's long-standing, long-developed institutional expertise and relationships in support of human rights and refugee protection around the world. Thank you for your commitment to human rights, and I look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Linden, for your testimony. Just to begin the questioning, let me point out that you, Mr. Bukhari, in a Reuters piece yesterday, underscored the concerns that you have, I think, with the paramilitary force that's being created, and especially as it relates to the August 5th remembrance of the second anniversary of the arrest of Prime Minister Khan. And I'm wondering if you might want to expand upon that. I'll give a few questions so we can expedite for the other members as well. But to me, that sounds like very ominous. I mean, the military is bad enough. Now they're going to, impress into service some additional people, thugs carrying guns. That's very, very disconcerting. If anyone would like to react to the August 2023 Intercept report that leaked Pakistani diplomatic cable, which then referred to then U.S. Ambassador Donald Lu of having encouraged Pakistani's military leaders to remove Khan. Is that true? Is it untrue? I don't know. I've read the Intercept article, and I'm just, it'd be nice to, on the record, to know with total transparency if that were true. With regards to the religious freedom and the sanctioning pursuant to the country of particular concern designation, one of the biggest disappointments that I've had with the IRFA law, and I held all the hearings on it back in 1997 and 1998, and then it was Frank Wolf's law, and then did a Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act in 2017 that expanded it significantly. And one of the biggest disappointments, no matter who's in the White House or at the State Department, while the designations often are accurate, there's no sanctions. And prescribed in the statute are at least 18 very significant sanctions that can be meted out to a country. Matter of fact, one of the only sanctions on travel was imposed on Modi for what he had done vis-a-vis a number of Muslim people that were killed, the Prime Minister of India. But that's about it. I mean, there's almost nothing. So we are going to be calling on the IRFA office to really look at imposing, especially all the terrible things that they're doing to various people of various faiths, to say, that's it. We've got 18 sanctions here, and we're going to impose them on you. So I do hope that will, and you might want to speak to that in response. On the YouTube issue, which is outrageous, in 2006, I had a hearing that lasted 7 hours on how Google, Microsoft, Cisco, and Yahoo were aiding and abetting the Chinese Communist Party, but Google in particular, by completely censoring all things related to Tiananmen Square massacre and everything else. But they're also opening up their vaults to Chinese Communist Party police, and Yahoo was especially egregious in this activity. And they were going to go after all the human rights activists, the democracy activists. And when I asked all 4 of them under oath, including Google, why are you doing this? Well, we got a request from police. I said, the police and the PRC are thugs. They kill people, they torture people. And now we see Google responding to one magistrate's demand to take down YouTube videos. And I think that's outrageous, and we need to raise that to them as well. They enabled the Chinese Communist Party, still do, but they're also, unfortunately, now playing a very malign role here in taking down those videos. I would finally point out that, in terms of foreign aid, the first Trump administration cut it off. The Biden administration pretty much continued that, I'm happy to say. But there were IMET and FMS sales, particularly for F-15s, F-16s, I should say. And they claimed that was a sale rather than, hey, if you're aiding and abetting their Air Force when you have such a dictatorial regime running the place, shame on us if we enable that. So if you want to speak to that, I would hope there'd be a complete clampdown on all of this. That has not happened. So we need to push that as well. So if you could, and again, if you all would like to finally make any further comment on HR 2311, bipartisan bill headed up so ably by Joe Wilson and Mr. Panetta. That to me seems a very good step, but we need additional sanctions. That's why the CPC, country of particular concern sanctions, they're sitting there right there to met out because of what they're doing on the religious persecution side.
Thank you, Co-Chair. As it goes for Donald Liu, who I believe was the Undersecretary at the time,
Right.
there was what you call the cipher, a classified document that goes from the ambassador from your ambassador back to your foreign office in your respective country. When that was decoded, and it was shared by our foreign minister to our prime minister at the time, Imran Khan, it had very non-diplomatic language used by Mr. Liu at the time. Along the lines, he had visited our ambassador on his farewell, but he had used undiplomatic language such as, if Imran Khan does not, stop from going to Russia, then we won't stop the move against him. If he does not do this, then we will remove him from power. So it was something which is completely uncalled for, especially for the way that diplomats operate. It also, when that was also given to the prime minister, he then declassified it from the federal cabinet of the country. And after it's declassified, it was then presented in front of the cabinet. So it was a very, I would say that it hurt millions of people, the way that the language was used by Mr. Liu. It was a clear indication of what was the thought process at the time. And obviously something was brewing in the background where Imran Khan's government wasn't anymore feasible for that time new regime of President Biden. As it goes for the parliamentary force, these things, the problem is that we have to learn from history. And whenever these things are created, they're not created for the reason of the greater good. They're usually created, especially in the province of KP, where we have our government, to basically be another force and to keep a check on us. And that too, the timely manner of it, just before Imran Khan from prison has declared that we are going to go for peaceful protests across the country and internationally, and we want those protests to hit its peak around the 3rd to 5th of August, nationally and internationally. These paramilitary forces have been created in the province where we have right now our government. So there's a massive gap of trust, mistrust between us, and we know that these are going to be used as a further clampdown method in the province where we're ruling.
Let me just speak to one of the issues, which is Google's behavior here, because I think it is both shocking and deplorable. And I say this as a lawyer because Google has an announced set of global standards that cover YouTube as well as to what kinds of content is acceptable and is not acceptable. And it should not be bullied by any country in the world that adopts arbitrary court orders that violate international interpretations of international law. Pakistan signed and ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 19 creates a right to freedom of opinion expression through any means you so choose, which would include YouTube. And Google shouldn't be looking to local court orders in Pakistan for what to do. It should be looking to its own standards. It should look at the complaint about videos and evaluate under their own standards, which are global standards, as to whether or not those standards have been violated. And if yes, they should take them down. And if no, as I think is very much the case with these specific channels, then it should say to Pakistan, we have a set of global standards we apply to everybody in the world. We're very sorry that you don't like that we are keeping these videos online, but we have to abide by the global policies that we have adopted. And so the fact that they caved so quickly, and now we understand that Pakistan's regime is trying to pressure them to take down those channels, not just in Pakistan, but globally, is really stunning, and I think would be a terrible blow to freedom of the press and freedom of political opinion and expression if they were to do that. And I hope that the Congress, Co-Chair Smith, you've been brilliant at hauling, and you too, Mr. McGovern, at hauling tech companies before the U.S. Congress and forcing them to answer questions about their policies. And to me, this would be a totally indefensible move. As of the moment, a court in Pakistan has suspended the blocking of those channels, but this is actually more of a move by the government that actually asked for this, because the government is trying to, in essence, extort Google into doing what it wants, and it's putting at risk, obviously, the money that they're making from Pakistan in the process.
Sanctioning pursuant to the IRFA.
Thank you, Chairman. So Amnesty International does not engage directly on CPC designations, but that being said, I think looking at the language of the statute, Pakistan certainly engages in systemic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom with respect to the treatment in both law and practice of Ahmadis and those accused of blasphemy. Also, just with respect to your point about weapon sales, I think the spirit of the Leahy Law, right, whether technically applicable here or not, should be upheld, and gross violations of human rights should certainly be looked into. And finally, just on the point about the Pakistan Democracy Act, we don't take a particular position on that either, or on the issue of sanctions on Pakistan. But I think what it demonstrates just generally is the degree to which the understanding of these human rights concerns has grown within Washington and around the world, frankly. And that really is just, I want to say, a credit to the human rights defenders, the brave journalists, lawyers, and activists who have stood up both in Pakistan and in exile or as part of the diaspora community to really shine a light on these tremendous concerns. So I just wanted to recognize that.
And to your point, Congressman, related to the military support that we're providing to Pakistan, I think we have reached a critical stage where the Pakistani leadership need to make a decision. They can no longer tiptoe between the authoritarianism and the democracies of the world. They can no longer be getting support from that side and then from this side, because it's counterproductive. I think the way things are moving in a direction where the Pakistani leadership have to choose. I think the recent meeting that President Trump had with the chief of the Pakistani Armed Forces, Asim Munir, is a clear testimony to the fact that who's in charge in Pakistan, and that they need to make a decision accordingly, that whatever supplies or support that they would need in terms of military for their armed forces, it needs to be aligned, that they can no longer be allowed to have within their entities and structures, whether military or civilian, people who have affinity to terrorism, people who have affinity to Taliban, and to people who have affinity to communism in China or the dictators in Russia. And I hope that they make that decision, and we need to make it conditional upon them that as long as they have those ties, that we would no longer be providing them support, and we will no longer be counting upon them in this struggle that is coming up. But if they do make a decision, The metrics are clear, as I have highlighted before, cutting off all the relationship and ties that they have with the Taliban, and then having a genuine democratic process within their country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll be brief because I know there's other people here. But let me first of all thank all of you for being here for your testimony. And Mr. Genser, I think you've just sparked a brilliant idea here in terms of Google. I mean, I think what we should do is we should call them in and have a private meeting with them. And if the private meeting doesn't turn out to be satisfactory, we do a public meeting with them. But I do think they need to know that people are watching, and that if they care about Congress, that they ought to care about the fact that we don't like what we're hearing. And so that's something I think we can commit to. I have a vibrant Pakistani community in Massachusetts who engage me all the time, and quite frankly, they're worried about signals coming from our government right now. And I just open this up to anyone here. I mean, can you characterize the relationship of the United States and Pakistani governments, and specifically, what does the Chief of Army Staff Munir's recent visit to the White House say about that relationship, and what that relationship might look like in the future? Because I get a lot of calls from people in my district who are really concerned about that, and I'm just wondering if any of you have any reaction to that. Mr. Bukhari?
If I may, that's a great question. I think, as it was stated earlier, that President Trump decided to meet who's in charge and who wields the power in this government. Our defense minister, Asif Khwaja, just recently, 2-3 days ago, gave 2 interviews, if not 3, stating that this is a hybrid government. What that means is for everyone's guess, but it basically means we lost the elections, we rigged it, and now we're sitting here because we have the cover from the military to allow us to sit here. And that's what we're going to call now a hybrid. But in February 2024, they were declaring that they won by a popular vote, and decided to have allies in the parliament. So I think what it is, to say fairly, is that President Trump probably didn't want to waste his time meeting someone with no power, that is the prime minister, and decided to meet someone who's calling the shots.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that answer. I guess some of my constituents are concerned about when I meet with somebody in the White House, I'm bestowing legitimacy on them and giving them respect that, quite frankly, every leader in the world and every official in the world doesn't get. Mr. Genser?
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that analysis. I mean, candidly, I don't think that the Trump administration right now is at all focused on Pakistan. There was a meeting, and there's some things going on, in terms of discussions, I guess, behind the scenes. But I think the point that I'm happy to make publicly to the Trump administration is that, you can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that you need to do so when it comes to Pakistan. And obviously, we don't want to say, well, we as the United States government are going to have no relationship with the country, et cetera. I mean, we just don't really typically act that way. Even diplomats don't act that way, even with the worst regimes that we engage with. You have to engage with them. The key thing is to put pressure on them, and to have President Trump, Secretary Rubio saying very clearly that, we want to have a positive and strong relationship with Pakistan, but this is what needs to be done in order to get from here to there. And that includes, releasing Khan and the political prisoners and so forth. But I do think we do have to engage with people that are in power. I mean, we do this, even with Kim Jong-un, and we're trying to
which
do it with Iran.
I would, I would question whether that was a good meeting.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, right.
That
But
wasn't.
no, I guess my issue is, I'm not talking about we don't engage. I'm talking about how and when you engage, and with whom you engage with. I mean, to me, coming to Washington is a pretty big deal, and it is unprecedented for a chief of army staff to visit the White House and meet with the president. But anyway, so I want a relationship. I think the relationship is good. We need to talk. We need to be talking about the political repression and releasing political prisoners and future of Imran Khan, all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like how you do it, right? And so I think
it also has to be multilateral, and I think we really need to engage the UN on
yeah.
this too. I mean, it's not just the U.S. that cares about human rights in Pakistan. It's obviously countless countries around the world with very large, Pakistani, diaspora
Right.
communities, et
I
cetera.
agree
mean,
with you.
It's
Yeah.
an enormous country,
No, it
Pakistan,
is.
and the number of people living abroad, I think, provides a lot of hope, because when you see how engaged the diaspora is here in the United States, your own constituents, as you're talking about, and other members were too, that gives me a lot of hope, because all these people, or many of these people, have family back home who could speak to what's going on and can bring to life, the tragedy that is Pakistan today in terms of the rights abuses. So I fully agree with you. We need the highest level of engagement, and there need to be a very clear benchmark set for the regime.
And notwithstanding transnational repression, I can assure you that my Pakistani constituents are very much engaged at every level. But I don't know if you have anyone else wants to add anything? Yeah.
I'll just briefly add, I would hope that during that meeting between the president and Mr. Munir, that the president would raise human rights. I know that there are a broad range of bilateral issues, Pakistan being a very strategic country, but I would hope that in that meeting and in future meetings, whether it is between the president and the leader of Pakistan, or at any level, that human rights are raised,
Right.
amending the law, amending these overly broad laws that you pointed to, whether it's PICA or the blasphemy law or the law affecting the rights of Ahmadis. There are a lot of opportunities to do a lot of good work in those meetings, and I hope they will take that opportunity.
And let me just, I just have one other question. I'm a big believer that the United States needs to lead, not just by its words, but by example. Right? And so, we can say a lot of things, but we have to do a lot of things too. And I think, Mr. Linden, you and Mr. Amini, you highlighted the precarity faced by Afghan refugees in Pakistan. And I also noted Mr. Amini's criticism of Pakistan's unwillingness to provide pathways to citizenship. I can't help but think of our own immigration policies here in the United States. I mean, the Trump administration's termination of TPS for Afghans leaves over 11,000 people vulnerable to deportation. And while I'm relieved that the travel ban on Afghanistan made an exception for Afghans on special immigrant visas, many Afghans who helped the U.S. during the war are not eligible for them. And so I guess my question, and anybody, for you guys, but if anybody who wants to chime in, I mean, can Congress credibly encourage the Pakistani government to support Afghan refugees when the U.S. government is unwilling to do so? How might we rebuild our credibility on this issue so that it's not just us saying to Pakistan, do something that we're not willing to do? I think what Pakistan's treatment of the Afghan community deserves condemnation. But I'm just, for us to say you have to treat Afghan refugees better when we're not, it just seems to me to be, I don't know, not particularly powerful. But I open this up. I don't know if you want to add, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. I think our understanding is that the United States leading the Western world and the way it is doing in terms of immigration is by far the best in the world that we have, the system that we have. And the way they have treated Afghans from the first day that the Afghan Republic was appeared that was collapsed, that they evacuated their allies, they sent military planes and brought all of these vulnerable Afghans to the United States through different ways and channels, while the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, India, all of these countries, they closed their borders. I'm not going to talk about Chinese and Russians, that they did not do anything on this regard. So I think for Pakistan, what we must say is that this was the first country that has started the deportation of Afghans. And so it's a very tragic and terrible precedent that they set as a neighboring country, as an Islamic neighboring country, for millions of Afghans who had escaped the very tyranny, the Taliban tyranny that the Pakistani leaders imposed upon Afghans. And I understand the concerns of any country, any nation, thinking about the future of the people who have come to their countries and the pathways and whether they are able to support them or not. But one reality that we cannot and we should not forget is what are the circumstances that we are deporting the people to? Currently, Afghanistan is being controlled by a terrorist regime, a terrorist group, a terrorist regime that is a puppet of Russian mafia. It's a terrorist group that has been created, that has been operationalized and managed by the former KGB officers, friends of Putin. It's the same group. The objective was very clear: to force the US and their Western allies, any Afghan associated with them, out. From the first time that they were created to the second time that they were created, the objective was clear: and to force the 50% population of Afghans into subjugation, that's the women of Afghanistan. So basically take the future of the country away from them. And so any nation, any country, when they're looking at sending any Afghan who is desperately trying to flee that circumstance to make sure that their daughters go to school, and they're taking them away from their schools and sending them back to that circumstance, they need to question whether they're truly human beings making that
I
decision.
don't disagree with you.
And so I think for the US, I think we are still hopeful. The way that they have done so far, we are grateful in how they have been managing this process. And I'm hopeful that there are legal pathways that they're working through and realizing that there is a precedent.
Yeah.
When the communist regime in Afghanistan was in charge, nobody was forced
Yeah.
back. And so hopefully they
Well,
will consider this.
I hope you're right. I have a lot of Afghan constituents as well who right now are terrified that their TPS is expired. I have others that I have relatives that are still in Afghanistan that helped the United States during the war and are still stuck there and are living in terror. I'm just simply saying that what Pakistan is doing is wrong. I think what we're doing is wrong too. Mr. Linden?
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, and thank you for your attention to that and for really uplifting the plight of those individuals and the need to restore TPS. We need TPS to be extended for Afghans in the United States. These people are vetted. They have been moved in some cases to camps, but U.S. military camps, and are waiting in limbo for their next stop. We need the care office to be reconstituted as soon as possible. Its dismantlement diminishes all the coordinated efforts that have had bipartisan support over the years for special immigrant visas, P1 and P2s. These are individuals who have fought alongside the United States in some cases. They have worked alongside the United States and our international partners to try to build a better future for Afghanistan. As a result, they have targets on their backs if they are returned to Afghanistan, excuse me. The United States and Pakistan both have international obligations under the ICCPR to practice the principle of non-refoulement, and they both need to be held accountable to doing that.
I appreciate that. I thank you again for everything. And Mr. Gensler, we'll get back to you. I think this Google meeting is essential. But again, I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate it.
Happy to help however you would like.
Okay, thank you. I yield back and thank the chairman.
Thank you very much to the co-chairs, and thank you to the panel of witnesses. I want to start by discussing what you, Mr. Amani, called the plight of women in Pakistan, the effects of the political repression on the women. Pakistan rates 145 out of 146 countries on the Global Gender Gap Index that tracks gender parity across economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Also, Pakistan is ranked among the lowest in the Gender Development Index, which measures gender gaps and inequalities in health, in education, and in living standards. Only 22% of Pakistani women are in the labor force compared to 81% of men. And if there were parity, Pakistan's GDP would rise by up to 60%. I think about Oregonian Nicholas Kristof, who wrote a book called Half the Sky, that women hold up half the sky in economics. So I want to ask you, Mr. Amani, and then also Mr. Linden, how has this destabilization, the democratic destabilization, contributed to the gender gap, and what will it take to reverse these trends?
Congresswoman, I think the double standard in the way the Pakistani leaders have been treating their own citizens, whether it's women or other ethnic groups, is its full display in front of us. And it's something that I think it's time for the international community, particularly United States, to question them and to call upon them, the duplicity. How could Pakistan claim to be a democracy, or any leader or anybody who speaks on behalf of Pakistan at any platform consider that they are pro-women and women's rights when they support Taliban, who have right now imposed a gender apartheid regime in Afghanistan for the second time. The same group was imposed upon Afghanistan by facilitation of the Pakistani leaders. And it wasn't just the Pakistani military. As I mentioned, the Pakistani leaders like Imran Khan, a charismatic leader who's supposed to be a very progressive guy on the international platform, he was acting as a spokesperson for the Taliban regime.
Straight.
I mean, these are all correlated. The way they are behaving abroad, the way they are behaving internally, it's all correlated. And basically, the institutionally and the way the power structure is built in Pakistan, it's men with uniform, with guns, and with money who control this state structure. The women are basically treated as a household member and being used from the time to time in politics, basically as a gesture to mislead the world, as if there is women's rights, some prime minister or some minister, some diplomat. But when you go look into that, all of these women are tied to the powerful families, to the rich families who are related to the military. Nobody from the grassroots. As I indicated, Dr. Mehrang Baluch is a clear example of a Baluch woman who's fighting for the freedom of her people, but she's being treated in a way that she's being treated, and there is no guarantee for her life and what's going to happen to her, whether she would survive this. And so the way it's put up, this state structure is a bunch of men, autocrats, authoritarians, with deep-rooted male chauvinistic approach, not just towards women inside their country, but also around the world. And the way they're using Taliban is a clear example. The way they're supporting the Taliban is a clear example of where they stand.
Thank you. Mr. Linda, do you want to weigh in on that as well? And then I do have another question.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman Bonamiki. First off, thank you for this question. I think, again, this would be a great topic for a future hearing so that this commission could hear directly from the women and gender diverse people that are directly impacted. And Amnesty International will be happy to help facilitate this in the future. You know, you asked one question about whether there was a better time. I don't have the knowledge to say if there was a better time in general. I will point to one particular form of law, which was the Transgender Persons Protection Act of 2018. Diverse groups continues to be widespread in Pakistan. The government has yet to make any concrete efforts to enact its domestic violence prevention and protection bill, despite its pledges in multilateral fora to do so. Legislation related to harassment and gender-based violence were passed in the form of the Harassment of Women in the Workplace Amendment Act in 2022 and the Anti-Rape Investigation and Trial Act of 2021, but those laws have lacked implementation. There is also an ongoing issue, longstanding issue of quote-unquote honor killings. There were 531 of them recorded between January and November of last year.
Just in 1 year.
Just in 1 year. There's a culture of impunity around those. And when it comes to gender-based violence, there is a culture, there is social stigma around reporting those. So these are deep-rooted issues, and it's important that they be raised. So I thank you for doing so.
It looks like Mr. Bukhari wants to say
Sorry,
something,
if
please.
I could just say a quick word. The gentleman on my left, he said some arguments, and I just want to clarify that Imran Khan was never going around being an ambassador for the Taliban, as he stated. Imran Khan is anti-war. I'm standing in front of congressmen of probably the most powerful army in the world. The U.S. spent over a decade in Afghanistan fighting these same people and got nowhere. And at the end, left trillions of dollars down the drain. So what is Pakistan going to do fighting these people when the U.S. miserably failed in it? So you must understand, we live in a neighborhood with Afghanistan on one side, Iran on another, India on another, and China. So Pakistan has to protect its borders. It has to try to protect the influx of terrorism that comes through those borders. And Imran Khan's always policy was that war leads to further terrorism. And that's all it was. So if the US couldn't find an answer to it, to think that Pakistan military or Pakistan political landscape could, is completely uncalled for. Another misstated fact was that every woman in politics is related to the military. We have dozens of politicians in my party right now that have made it from grassroots level and up. In fact, today, a young one just got awarded a senator ticket. One is a gynecologist right now rotting in prison with Imran Khan, who's a gynecologist and a health minister. Pakistan was the first country in the world to have, Islamic country in the world to have a female prime minister. Benazir Bhutto wasn't from the military. Benazir Bhutto was the chairman of her political party, Pakistan People's Party. So, these are incorrect facts, but at the end of it, I would just want to say one thing, that there are a lot of there are smaller archery problems. The reality is that you're not going to find a solution to any of these problems, let it be gender equality, let it be terrorism, let it be anything else. Terrorism has increased in the last 2-3 years drastically, maybe 200% fold since our government has fallen. Why? Because it ruins when you destroy and remove the democratic fabric that the people have picked. The demographics of Pakistan don't give that kind of support and belief into the leader. 2019 was the safest year in Pakistan for the last 15 years. 2019 was the safest year in Pakistan for the last 15 years after 2019. So reality is that when you get your basics and your foundations right of democracy and people's will and people's support and have the people supporting you, you can start going into the smaller arteries and handle all these problems like discrimination of women or freedom of religion and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the clarification. And just to follow up, and Mr. McGovern pretty much asked my second question, but I want to follow up a little bit. When an Amnesty International report, Mr. Linden, from 2024 discusses, of course, many disturbing examples of oppression that we've heard about today, the attacks on freedom of expression, a failure to protect journalists' safety, crackdown on protests, and the freedom to peacefully assemble, arbitrary arrests and detention of civilians, as well as enforced disappearances and the mass detention and deportation of refugees. And as Mr. McGovern was pointing out, and as we've discussed, it's pretty distressing to see parallels now happening in the United States. And I fear that the values we once embodied as a country are under attack and in some places disappearing. So what lessons can we learn from the erosion of democracy in Pakistan? What can we be doing here to strengthen our democratic institutions? But also, if you could talk a little bit about how the current leadership in Pakistan is perceiving what the erosion of democracy here in this country, I think that would be helpful for us to hear. Who wants to start? I'd like to hear whoever wants to weigh in. Thank you.
I'd be happy to start. Thank you, Congresswoman Bonamiki. I think it's a really important question. I think the first parallel, unfortunately, is on the right to peaceful protest. I won't say parallel as in equal. I just mean it's an important thing to bear in mind based on what we see in Pakistan. We see the arbitrary detention of peaceful protesters in Balochistan. We see the crackdown on peaceful PTI protesters and how this is intended to create a chilling effect on dissent generally. We see the use of dubious legal provisions that are used to justify these detentions, and that erodes rule of law. When rule of law is eroded, it threatens protections of everybody's rights in a society. We also see a theme of impunity and lack of successful pushback against attacks on civic space and rule of law throughout Pakistan. There was lack of transparency where they were talking about the decision to deport Afghan refugees, the passage of the cybercrime law, the Balochistan anti-terrorism law, or the deadly crackdown, again, on the PTI demonstration last year. Impunity, lack of transparency, and attacks on rule of law enable further crackdowns. So I think the lesson for the US there is that when rule of law is sacrificed for refugees or activists or students or anybody else, it threatens the rights of the whole society. And last thing I would say is, believe it or not, I think the blasphemy laws are instructive as well. And of course, we don't have those in the United States. But what they demonstrate is that institutions don't stand on their own. They need to be defended. When blasphemy allegations are made, police may protect the person from the mob that may go after them to try to kill them, but then they are pressured into arresting and charging the victim to appease the mob. Lawyers are afraid to represent victims of these allegations because they know that they too could be targeted, and they have. Judges are afraid to acquit individuals accused of blasphemy because they could be targeted for the same reasons. So these institutions that were set up to protect people's rights need to be defended so that they can continue to protect people's rights.
Thank you very much. Anyone else interested in the comment
Just
on
may
that?
just respond to the gentleman. The United States fought for 10 years in Afghanistan or more and didn't win because Pakistan was supporting the Taliban. The United States fought in Afghanistan, didn't win because Russia was supporting the Taliban. And now we know that Russia was behind it. Russia was paying the Pakistanis, and Pakistanis were doing the dirty job for them. And they were also in coordination with the Chinese, and they were also coordination with the IRGC of Iran. That's why the US could not win in that region. And so when Imran Khan came out in celebration of the victory of the Taliban when the US withdrew, he did not mention anything about the women rights in Afghanistan. When he was asked about it, he put it a cultural tone. He said, that's their culture of the people. Another insult, add an insult to the people of Afghanistan that that is the culture of the people. And so now that the Taliban are becoming an issue in Pakistan, now they know what's the problem that they have created. And so I think it's good for us to be honest when we are taking the stage on these platforms and to be truthful about what's in front of us. What we know is the Pakistani state, not just the military, but also the civilian politicians, acted in coordination to impose a gender apartheid regime in Afghanistan. The gender apartheid regime that right now millions of Afghans are escaping from, and they escaped to Pakistan. And right now the Pakistanis are forcing them to go back to Afghanistan, adding another cruelty to whatever atrocities that they have committed. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I share the position that Mr. Linden said about the importance of restoring the State Department staff and the offices and obviously TPS. Did either of you, Mr. Bukhari or Genscher, want to weigh in on the perception of people in Pakistan about what's happening here in the United States? The perception of people and the current military leadership, what are they perceiving about what's happening in the United States?
Well, the people of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan have high hopes from President Trump. President Trump and Imran Khan shared a very warm relationship, and we believe that if there's someone that would show collective responsibility and lead it, it would be we had hoped that it would be President Trump for it. Naturally, the recent meeting probably disheartened many American Pakistanis and Pakistanis in Pakistan, but like the gentleman and the panelist said, it seems that Pakistan military is not only the strongest military within Pakistan, but also internationally it defeated the United States and Afghanistan apparently as well. So we're dealing with a very strong
Thank you.
military.
And Mr. Chairman, I hope that we as commissioners can work together and address a lot of these issues that we're. Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Omar.
I want to start by thanking our co-chairs for holding this hearing. The human rights crisis in Afghanistan is far-reaching. As our witnesses have testified, Pakistanis are being targeted for harassment, repression, arbitrary detention, and forced disappearance for numerous reasons. Some are being targeted for their political affiliation. Imran Khan is an emblematic example, but by no means not the only example. Some are being targeted for their work as journalists and human rights defenders. Some are being targeted for defending their land and culture as the Balochistan. Still others are being targeted because they are a religious minority. What it amounts to is thousands of Pakistanis having been subjected to a wide range of human rights violations. It is a deeply alarming and outrageous pattern. The United States has a clear role to play here. Pakistan is one of our most important allies. This gives us a moral obligation to stand up for the people that are being targeted. It also gives us an enormous leverage. Mr. Linden, I want to begin my question by talking about another group of people that the Pakistani government is targeting, the Afghan refugees, who I had the honor of visiting when I went to Pakistan a few years back. Hundreds of Afghanis are living in Pakistan, some of whom have lived there for decades and are now being subjected to forced deportation. Can you touch on what are the international law implications of deporting people to a place they are likely to face torture or imprisonment?
Thank you, Congresswoman Omar. You're absolutely right. First off, there have been generations of Afghans living in Pakistan. They form part of the fabric of society, and yet they have been denied their rights. They have been demonized and constantly threatened with deportation. Amnesty recently actually put out a report focusing on the individual stories of some of the Afghan refugees who are impacted. One of those was a 27-year-old who we called Parwana Rahimi, although that's not her real name. She focused on socioeconomic challenges faced by Afghan women in Afghanistan. She started receiving death threats as the Taliban increasingly restricted women's journalists and women in general. And she left Pakistan as a matter of survival. But since then, she has had to deal with threats of deportation and harassment from the authorities, despite holding a visa and legal documentation. She has said herself, "I request the Pakistani government to see us as human beings, not just as refugees, and to extend their support to Afghan refugees facing genuine difficulties." She's also urged agencies such as UNHCR to expedite their processing to relocate refugees to safer countries as the uncertainty and challenges in Pakistan continue to mount. Pakistan put into place in 2023 an illegal, what's called, quote unquote, illegal foreigners repatriation plan, which initiated what may be one of the largest forcible returns of refugees in modern history. Over 1 million have already been deported in violation of the principle of non-refoulement. And that goes, I think, to your question about the international law basis. That is a principle that the United States and Pakistan both have the obligation to uphold. It is central to our obligations under the ICCPR. And again, this is a particular concern for Afghan women and activists. I think it's just critically important for both ends of this equation to be upheld. The U.S. has to continue to allow in those Afghan refugees in Pakistan who have been waiting in line and have been vetted and are undergoing vetting for U.S. visas. They also have to call on the Pakistani government to basically get rid of this quote unquote illegal foreigners plan and extend the validity of the proof of registration cards held by 1.4 million Afghans in Pakistan currently. And for anybody watching at home or in the room, you can join Amnesty International's calls by writing directly to the Pakistani government, asking them to uphold the rights of these refugees and immediately stop all deportations and renew the validity of these proof of registration cards, which expired on June 30th. So all those 1.4 million Afghan cardholders are in a very precarious situation.
I do hope that those calls are answered. There could be some hope in having international pressure that reverses the course. I mean, the President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio have just fired everybody that's working in the care office at the State Department. Last year, under the Biden administration, I was able to meet with the Pakistani ambassador, advocating for them to stop the deportations. It is hard for us to have any sort of credibility right now in engaging in that kind of advocacy when we ourselves are deporting Afghans back to Afghanistan. And we certainly have, as you'd alluded to, hundreds of people that are waiting in different military bases that have been identified. Sending them back is sending them back to a death sentence. And so I do hope that the public is able to do more than we are able to do as part of the government that is currently carrying out deportations. Mr. Gencer, we have to understand the persecution of Imran Khan in the larger context, as you said in your testimony. What are the implications of the de facto criminalization of the PTI itself for Pakistan's democracy?
Thanks, Congresswoman Omar, for the very, very important question. I've represented political prisoners in more than 20 countries around the world over the course of my career. A lot of them political leaders, some Nobel Peace Prize laureates, and so forth. And unfortunately, you see a very similar pattern emerge when authoritarian regime takes over a country and transforms a country from being a democracy, albeit a fragile one, into an authoritarian regime. And it means they go after it from the very start. Anybody that might be in a position to challenge them. And in light of the circumstances in Pakistan, it made a lot of sense, obviously, that Imran Khan would be the first target because he had a very, very popular base of support and still does. But of course, it wasn't enough to go after him because of the wide array of supporters of the PTI in the country, activists and human rights defenders. And from there, you broaden the circle outward to those who threaten you, right? So you go after the media, right? Because any free and independent media can talk about the rights abuses that are being committed. You go after human rights defenders, people on the ground standing up for the rights of women, the rights of religious minorities, and so forth. You go after civil society organizations themselves. You criminalize NGOs, and you go after their bank accounts. You engage in transnational repression to go after those who are speaking out or acting against you around the world. My colleague, Mr. Bukhari, here was the subject of abuse of red notice, where they filed false charges against him. Interpol just listened to what Pakistan asked for and issued the red notice against him. And we were able to ultimately get that taken down within a number of months. But that makes it very difficult, as you can imagine, for anyone even abroad to think about speaking up and speaking out. You now see, of course, them going to companies that are operating in Pakistan and like Google, right? And then, trying to criminalize them simply just providing YouTube access to their own population of people who are journalists and human rights defenders and so forth. So it began with Khan and the PTI, but that was not nearly sufficient because Pakistan has such a vibrant civil society and strong tradition of political engagement by its population. And so I think that this is what we've seen, is this extraordinary retrenchment that began with Khan and the PTI, but obviously has proliferated, throughout the entire country and extended out globally around the world against any critics of the regime.
Yeah. We're also seeing young members of the Pakistani Communist Party as well being targeted at the moment, right?
Undoubtedly, yes. Anybody that is seen as a threat to the regime, and because they're weak and they know it, right? They are very, very afraid. My own experience has been quite interesting over the years, going up against many dictatorships, and I've met with many governments when I represent political prisoners. And, the bottom line is, if they were as popular as they thought they were, or as they claim to be, right, why do you need to repress anybody? Why don't you have free speech? Why don't you have free media? Let people tweet out what they want on X or any other social media platform, access YouTube, right? If there's nothing to be afraid of and you actually believe you have the popular support of your people, then it's very easy to let people say what they want, because you're not threatened by it, because you have transparency and accountability in your government. And so, yes, indeed, I think, any opposition political party is a threat, no matter how small, to this regime because of their tenuous grip on power.
Yeah, and what does this tell us about this government's long-term ambitions and agenda?
I'm probably not the best person to speak about that as an international human rights lawyer and someone who has worked on Pakistan issues for more than 20 years, but I wouldn't really consider myself an expert on the internal dynamics of it. What I can just say overall is that, it's a very difficult and challenging environment for the military regime, military-backed regime, to hold on to power because so many Pakistanis globally and within the country are so outspoken and are willing to risk their lives for the sake of their own people and their country. And when you're talking about a country of 250 million, with people being as vibrant and as engaged as they are in politics and civil society and activism in the media, right? This is not North Korea. Right? It's a very, very vibrant society that, one can access VPN to get news from around the world, despite the regime blocking it. The regime turned off the internet for 24 hours when the election day happened. And, that didn't stop the world from analyzing the results and saying that this was a stolen election. So I actually have a lot of hope because of the Pakistani people and the diaspora around the world for the future of Pakistan personally. And I think that this is the tidal wave that this current military regime is not going to be able to withstand ultimately.
And finally, Mr. Bukhari, you in your testimony, you mentioned Arshad Sharif's assassination in Kenya. That's sending shockwaves and making it hard for journalists, whether they are abroad or in country, to be able to exercise their ability to do their work. Can you elaborate a little bit about how has that shifted the culture for folks within country, not just those outside of the country?
Sure. I mean, Pakistan in general has over about 200 independent private channels. So actually, it was a very vibrant, we had very vibrant media that was always criticizing, questioning, analyzing the government to be. We've always had issues with media and the intelligence agencies, but they've been very minute compared to the overall. This time, you see all your top, after Usher Shree's death, you see all the top 5, 10 journalists who are the best anchors in our country are either in exile or they've taken gardening leave sabbaticals. Kashif Abbasi is probably one of the biggest anchor. I think you met him in your last trip. He's one of the best anchors in the country, if not the. He's on gardening leave, and reason is because he refuses to talk about weather, on a 9 o'clock show. This. I'm being serious, and so this is what happens. We've got Dr. Moeen Pirzada, who's one of our most respected TV personalities. He's here in Pakistan and US. He can't go back, and this is happening now across the board. You'll see a lot of people moving towards these YouTube channels. Hence, last week you saw the magistrate court's order. I would just like to say, if I may, Congresswoman, is that when you asked Jared about what's coming, just recently, due to the 26th Amendment, our reserve seats were snatched away and stolen from us. Our reserve seats, believe it or not, are of women, are apportionment of what you have in Parliament. And despite the brutal rigging that we had in the 2024 election, the portion of what you win in the National Assembly, you get given reserve seats, which are for basically women and non-Muslims. Those were snatched all away from us. What's coming in the coming days or weeks is that you're going to see this government now is going to, and the military courts are going to convict even more MNAs, members of National Assembly, in the May 9th cases, in the garb of these May 9th cases. So we're probably going to end up losing another 20 to 30 seats in Parliament because they're going to be convicted for either 10 years or 10 years thingy. So we're going to have less of a majority because despite all of this, we were the single largest party in Parliament still. So in the coming days, weeks, or months, you're going to see them try to decrease our number even further so that they can strengthen themselves.
Really appreciate that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I know that Mr. Sadiq Amani, you said that the Pakistani government was fighting us and fighting with the Taliban. It's actually the inverse is true. The Pakistani government was helping the United States fight its war in Afghanistan, and actually, I think took a lot of losses, not just in credibility with the Muslim world, who saw them as betraying their allegiance, but also created problems for them with terrorism in itself. So since you were concerned about us telling the truth in this committee, I just wanted to mention that. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Just to conclude, as a pivot from this hearing, we will press hard for the religious freedom sanctions to see if that can be done. Raise all of these issues, obviously, with the administration. We'll do a letter, again, to the Pakistani leadership asking for Khan's and his wife's release and all the other prisoners, and pivot your testimonies as being another major wake-up call to Congress and the executive branch from totally responsible and incisive testimonies that you have provided. So I thank you for that. We'll get working on that letter. Any thoughts that you have as how we should draft it? But your testimonies speak for themselves, and that will help. I worked closely with Shabazz Badi, who was horribly assassinated in 2011. Met with him many times. He really had this belief that there could be religious pluralism, that there can be coexistence, and he believed it to his bones. and to the core of his being, and yet he was assassinated. I met with Benazir Bhutto many times, going as far back as the Cairo Population Conference when she was there, or the women's it was in Beijing, and she was a very, very articulate, effective leader. Whether you agree with her politics or not, I agreed a lot with it, but she was very effective. She was assassinated. And now, of course, if we're all talking about, with Arshad being assassinated as well, a prominent member of the media, we need to call out, this isn't just transnational with him. Repression is transnational terrorism. And we need to make sure that the government knows that we hate it, and we're going to speak out against it and use sanctions to the best of our ability to try to mitigate it. I would point out that presidents have a propensity to meet with all sides. I chair the China Commission. I've worked on human rights in China. I've chaired 107 hearings. I'm barred from going to China these days. I'm barred from going to Minsk these days, Belarus, because of the Belarus Democracy Act, which I wrote in 2004 and have done 3 since. Barred from Russia too. You got that one right. And so what I'm saying is that our presidents traditionally have met with people who are unsavory. Why meet with Xi Jinping? Well, he is the president, but he's also a butcher, and he's committing genocide against the Uyghur as we meet here again today. But you got to meet with him to fight with him. Even President Clinton had the butcher of Beijing, Cha Haitian, who came here. He ordered the operational commander, sent the tanks in, killed all kinds of people. He goes to the Army War College and says nobody died at Tiananmen Square. I put together a hearing within 2 days, had all of these witnesses who saw it, including the Time magazine correspondent, a editor from the People's Daily who went to prison for trying to report on the truth. And we had an empty chair. We invited him to come too. But he went to the White House. He was now defense minister, promoted because of his brutality. And I did ask the president, don't do that, please, but he did it. But that said, unsavory people, and we got to make sure that when they have that conversation in the White House, it is no holds bars. And they say, look, you may be the chief of staff of the military or whatever you might be, but we find this absolutely objectionable. We're going to speak out. So we're going to follow up on everything. Your testimonies, your courage is extraordinary, and I can't thank you enough for it. And thank you, Jared, for always being a man of so many great ideas. And we've worked with Jared on a lot of countries around the world, and he is all in on Pakistan, and I thank him for that. The hearing is adjourned.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab. My name is Sunil Salim. I'm from Lahore. My profession is call center agent.
क्या आप नॉन मुस्लिम हैं?
Yes, I'm a non-Muslim. I'm a Christian.
Go ahead.
Okay. So my question is कि Surah Al-Tawbah, chapter number 9, verse number 31 के अंदर